I'm Katarina Jones, and this is Otherwise Insights, lessons in leadership and entrepreneurship from the intersections of life. An organization is only as good as its people. So it's important to be able to find great team members who are excited to be there and motivated to do their jobs. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about spotting talent. And as always, we'll be looking at it from two diverse perspectives. We'll be speaking with an athletic talent scout for a professional baseball team.
My name is Ryan Leake. I'm the Southwest Regional Scouting Supervisor for the Houston Astros, 2017 World Champions.
And we'll be comparing and contrasting his perspective with someone that has been in the business talent world for many years.
My name is Heather Doshay, and I'm the VP People at Webflow, a software company based in San Francisco and distributed around the world, where I lead our people, team operations, IT, EA, and of course, for this topic, talent and recruiting.
Both of these people have to recognize natural talent, think about transferable skills, build a pipeline, and get people excited about their organization. So let's see what the two of them had to say. From a business perspective of recruiting people and from an athletics perspective of recruiting people and spotting talent, how do you think, what are some of the similarities and what are some of the differences?
I've done quote unquote recruiting on the collegiate side of the sport before, and now my title or my role is more entrenched in observing and being an objective scout. So I'm essentially charged with looking at what we call the 5 tools of the sport. So you're trying to keep it objective and look through a certain lens to see what kind of objective talent these kids have. And so I would surmise that on your side of things, you have to sort of pare things down when you have this large pool of people that are vying for a job, that you have to whittle it down somehow. You can't get too deep with 1,000 different people and really get down to the nitty-gritty of who they are, because it just takes too much time. So we have ways of thin slicing talent, thin slicing what we're looking for. And, we essentially call those 5 tools. And it's not to get too baseball dorky, but how they run, how they throw, how they hit, how they defend, and how much power they have. And so through an objective lens, you can sort of get a picture of what kind of profile this person has. And so that's the criteria that we work off of to sort of pare down thousands and thousands of names down to a pool of a couple of hundred to then get deeper and deeper into who that person is and how they might fit into our vocation, which is a sport.
It's really interesting the way you framed that just now, because I had written down some notes of what I assumed, and my answer has changed even just hearing what you described. So my thought originally was at the very highest level that we both just have these teams, and our teams need to be balanced by having certain skill sets that are stronger or, whatever than others, and balance everybody out. And every, skill set or competency that we're looking for to fill a gap on that team, we can then go ahead and find people. And so I thought, at a very high level, it's pretty similar, but when you kind of dial in how you get there might look very different. And so I think our how might be different, but hearing that, it actually wasn't that different. It's just probably, one click further, a little bit different. So
it's interesting to hear kind of what you were saying about getting really specific about what you're looking for, kind of the thin slicing as you were talking about. And that's, I imagine, pretty similar, Heather, in terms of recruiting, like getting really specific, like what do we really want and how do we then go out and find that?
Totally. Yeah. I mean, there's, tons of different roles at a tech company, and there's different departments, different kind of skill sets that you're looking for. But ultimately, to be able to find great talent, you have to identify what those main core skill sets are, or else you're constantly going to be just comparing people without really a basis for what your rubric is. And so it's interesting to hear that you have sort of the 5 things that are the same for everybody, no matter what their role is on that baseball team, because on our end, we have different skill sets for everything, which makes it a little bit complicated. We have to decide first, what are we even looking for? And then go out and find people who might be able to fit those things, and also balance with a lot of inbound applications, which I don't know that you have the same kind of level of ability for baseball players to come and inbound and say, hey, I want to be considered for the team. It seems like it's a little bit more proactive, which in the recruiting world, we call it like sourcing. So we go out and we find the talent, which I assume is similar to scouting. And then we have this additional dynamic of people applying at the same time, not necessarily with what we're looking for, but they could be a good match in many ways. And so that's where the weird key comes in, is being able to recognize sort of the skill sets amongst a non-traditional profile that's applied.
Side of things, I'm curious, when you are looking for talent, what's important for people to think about as they're kind of going through that process? And then also, how do you see people getting it wrong when they're evaluating talent?
I think the biggest pitfall of my job is you can't get married to the idea of just getting people to have people, just getting a guy to have a guy. The ego gets involved, and the ego gets in the way quite a bit because, I'm Ryan. I want my boss to know that I'm supplying a job force to my company, that I'm bringing players to the Astros, and so I get valued. And I think that's a huge problem in our world where, there's 40 rounds in a typical draft. This year's draft was a different dynamic, but you're sort of fighting with yourself to honestly value and evaluate these players, not just to force your directors and force your superiors to take somebody because you panic into thinking you need to prove your value. I think that's probably the most glaring obstacle that I see people trying to overcome. And I apologize, I forget what the first part of your question was, but I had to get that one out there, that I think there's this big push just to get somebody. If I don't get somebody, I might not be able to function, or I might get fired because I didn't get anybody. And you end up getting someone you don't really need, or somebody that's not a really good fit for the organization.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. The first part of my question was just around what's important for people to think about as they're looking for talent.
The objective factors, keeping that in mind, and at the utmost developing a bare bones profile for what that player could become at the highest level of the sport, or the highest level of our vocation, and not getting too muddled and too confused with where's he from? What are his parents like? Is he a nice kid? Is he a bad kid? Like, what's the makeup like? Like, all that stuff you can figure out on down the road if the organization deems him a fit for the team or for the system. So at the very, very outset of the draft process and evaluating these guys, you just are trying to put profiles together. And some of the profiles I'm talking about are is he an everyday center fielder in the major leagues? Is he an everyday catcher? If he's a pitcher, can he fit into a starting rotation, or is he more of a guy that pitches at the back end of a bullpen? You're trying to put him in buckets so you don't spend too much time on the ones that you don't think have a very high ceiling, and then you get much, much deeper on the ones that carry some ceiling that can really push you towards a championship level at the highest point of the sport, which is the major leagues.
It's so eerie. It's so similar in so many ways, if you just change out some of the words, basically. It's funny. So I thought about this question as you're talking, and my first thought was like, okay, it's really important to decide what you need before you start evaluating people, because human biases are so strong. And so when you meet someone who's super charming or dynamic versus someone who's not a great interviewer, but that like good kid versus bad kid kind of concept, like your biases get in the way of what you're actually looking for, which is a very specific skill set for somebody to do a job. And you have to start there and recognize that like these other pieces might add to who the person is, and they might contribute or they might detract in some ways, but those can't be the basis for hiring, or else you end up with like some pretty tricky things. Like, I never want to consider what college somebody went to. In fact, I don't believe, maybe this is different for baseball, but I don't believe someone for like 95% of the jobs that I hire for has a need to have a college degree to be good at the job. But it's so easy to see like Harvard and be like, oh, that's flashy. And then suddenly you're like interested in this person when you don't actually know if they're a good skill set match for the job. So the most important thing I think is like, know what you need in advance, like decide, why are we hiring this role in the first place? What is this role going to offer the company? And like, when you do that, like document it, like think about who could fit that profile outside of even what the traditional person might be. So, there's certainly like skill sets and experiences that are acquired by being in a certain job over time at a company over time. And you can say, oh, that's really easy. Like maybe picking someone from a different major league team, you know exactly how they would perform on your team because of how they performed elsewhere. But there could be someone who's like super scrappy, who's got all these great skill sets and they're really raw, but they're completely unrelated to the exact profile you typically hire for. And you sort of miss that profile if you're looking at sort of the comfort of certain little indicators that you've liked in the past about somebody. So I think it's just so interesting because ultimately, like, I don't really care if someone has a computer science degree if I know that they can code really well, because I know that college doesn't even teach some of the languages that we're working with at my company. And so what does it mean, and how much bias you sort of get in the way if you sort of go with like, who do I like, who do I connect with, and all of that, which you kind of mentioned too, which is like, it's easy to get stuck in who their parents are or whatever, which is, I think, sort of a weird parallel.
Yeah. And background matters. But again, when you're initially evaluating these kids and trying to put them into buckets and trying to, again, thin slice them, that's all the nitty gritty of, whether or not you think they're going to hit their ceiling, and trying to figure out on down the road if we're going to invest in them. But, you talk about degree programs in colleges, and our industry is guilty of the same exact thing, where there's a Power 5 bias, the Power 5 being the Power 5 conferences at the college level. There's an inherent bias to just take the player from the high information school where the resources are the best, where they've been proven against quote unquote the best talent. And then we'll forget about the Division 2s, Division 3s, the NAIA schools, because they're just lesser known commodities. And while Ryan has a good report on one of the players from a Division 3 school, we're just not comfortable taking that kid because the context isn't there. Now we do, like you said, we can get deeper and we can try to sell that kid more. It's just a longer process, and that's why getting it up the chain, getting people seen, and trying to throw a flag like, hey, this guy's a priority. Like, you need to go talk to him. You need to go see him. That's where your monetary evaluation of them and your evaluation in the draft matters so much. Is you're that first point of contact, like I said, and the people up the chain need to know that regardless of where this kid goes to school, regardless of what other teams think about him, I think based off my personal projection models that this kid could be a very impactful big leaguer. Like, he could eventually be a guy that carries us to a championship. And that's one of the beautiful things about what my position is. We can, ignore where they go. We have to see everybody at every level because there's diamonds in the rough everywhere. And one of the top picks in the draft this year, ironically, went to Chapman, which is a Division 3 school in Orange County. And some teams wrote him off because he was at a D3 school and other teams didn't. So I like that I'm in a group that enjoys, dipping their tethers into a lot of different waters,
I think it's actually like more fulfilling almost when you see someone succeed and they weren't set up for that. Like they didn't go to like the very best school for baseball, right? Like Clemson, or I don't remember. I'm trying to remember who.
Yeah, no, it's a good one. That's a really good one. Kudos.
I know a little bit. But like, let's say they went to Clemson, like, well, yeah, like they're going to be successful no matter what. And then when they are, like, cool, gosh, we predicted that, but then there's someone that you find, say, like at like a Chapman or even like a UCSD, which was a D3 school, right? And then suddenly you're like, wait, this person's actually like really talented, but they've never been cultivated or invested in this certain way, but they have like this very raw talent. And if they join our team and they're managed well, guess what? Like, they could actually be very successful, and maybe more so than anyone else really saw. And that's what I really love about recruiting is it's like great when you can win over the talent NRN from like Google or Airbnb or any of the top places where the talent's been really vetted and they've done a great job and succeeded. But it's so much more refreshing when you find someone with a super non-traditional profile and you watch them really thrive and they have a career defining moment with you because they didn't have that chance before. And I think that's just such a special feeling. And I get the chills just like thinking about what you can do for someone's life when you make that a possibility for them. And like you said, and it's even more grand stakes in your world, because if in the minors versus the majors, it's like a factor of like 10x the salary. Like for us, they would have found another job, but maybe they get a little bump, like 30-40%. It's a huge quality of life boost to be able to join a tech company from, say, a non-tech company. So
yeah, and piggybacking off of that. So anecdotally speaking, one of my greatest successes in this side of things, because I've worked at a lot of different sides of the sport of baseball, but I've been in scouting for 6 years now, and the best success to this point was exactly one of these kids that we're talking about, where he was still a Division I player, but he was a fifth-year senior. He had to go to 3 years of junior college. He went all the way from Phoenix to Hawaii to finish his eligibility. So he's at the University of Hawaii, and we were the only team that called him about a draft workout and then subsequently maintained interest throughout the draft. And so in a 40-round draft, we took him in the 27th round, maybe the 26th round, but late, and got $1,000. That was it. So essentially a plane ticket to go play. And he was in the 2017 draft class, which was a really vaunted, talented, deep pool of players. He was the first one to play in the major leagues. We traded him. He didn't get there with us, but he made it there with the Arizona Diamondbacks, his hometown team. His name's Josh Rojas. And so it's one of those really, really intriguing, exciting, heartwarming moments that, hey, this was a totally non-traditional pick. Nobody foresaw this kid doing anything, and he's the quickest one to reach the highest level in his entire draft class. So I'm with you on the reward.
I wonder if you did see it, because I think, like, going back to sort of that original question, which is like, what do you look for? Like, how do you find it? I think back to all the non-traditional picks that I've led in my career when I'm hiring people for my own team, and almost every time what it is they apply, or they've applied to a completely different job, and I just find them somehow, and they've been passed over. And I look at their resume, I'm like, did you click into this? And what I love is that, at least in our role, we have LinkedIn, which a resume can only tell the story that they've told. There's no interaction, whatever. I can't really understand what something is. I'm like, I don't know what that company is, like, sort of move on to the next, right? But on LinkedIn, I can sort of click in to the company, understand the story, like make connections, look at the website for the company, where they come from. And that's where I found some of the best folks, is like, it's sort of like, if I can tell the story in my head about why they're right for this role, even if they haven't been able to articulate it for themselves, and to see that, it's like this magical moment where I think back to, like, okay, so on my team now, or in my broader department, we have a recruiting coordinator on the team who he applied for the job, and recruiting coordinators are like the first level in recruiting. It's like the junior level. You do all the interview scheduling. It's sort of like, sometimes straight from college it's a role, sometimes it's a career changer who's looking to get into tech. And this person, he was a career changer. And when you have a role that's entry level, maybe this is something that's different between baseball and the business world, but entry level roles get way more applications than everything else, because it's just a broader pool of people who could be qualified. And so you get, like, sometimes 1,000 applications at a company my size, which is not a huge tech company, 1,000 applications for a role like that. And it's very easy to get exhausted looking through. And it's very easy to say, like, okay, let's just take all the people with recruiting coordination experience written in their resume and just go with them and X out everybody else. But if you take a little bit of time and you actually, like, click through each person, I just go to their LinkedIn profiles directly, because I can, like, understand more of their story that way. Sometimes they have, like, an interest that's at the very bottom of their LinkedIn that I'm like, oh, that's super relevant. Like, you love the space that we're in. That's probably why you applied. Like, let's talk, And with Sean, I look at this profile, and this is a person on our team. He applied, and it wasn't really obvious. He wasn't super junior in his career. He had been working for maybe 5-6 years in public health administration, doing project coordination for public health, like nonprofits. And I thought, random, but, like, I see the hard skill set. Like, somebody like this, coordination of projects in a super structured area is going to be very consistent and able to schedule stuff. So, like, I get, like, that they could do it, but we have a whole different tool set. And, like, why jobs specifically? Like, what do you care about recruiting? And then I looked down to the next thing, and I realized, oh, he's been doing this part-time job that's also on his LinkedIn. And if you didn't look at the dates, you wouldn't even think it. And it said, "Let's Eat, Grandma." And I thought, what's that? Like, that's a weird name for a company, Let's Eat Grandma. So I clicked into it, and it was a resume review company. And he had been part-time for the entirety of his career in project management, doing resume review for fun on nights and weekends, basically for, like, extra money and with his friends. And I thought, wow, like, he has all the hard skills, which is, like, the scheduling, the coordination, the being super, not sorry, the hard skills, the soft skills, all the, being able to be organized and all that, like, it's proven from the other career that's totally different than this one. And he has a passion for recruiting, because he's kind of doing it in a very different world, but he's helping people with their interviews. Like, he's looked at 1 million resumes, And so I thought, okay, like, this is somebody, I think this is the person. And I didn't even meet him. I didn't know anything about him. I didn't know a single drop of anything, but I saw those 2 bits, and I'm like, here's a story, and it makes sense to me. And then, you flash back, and I'm like, he got the job across 1,000, like, you know, maybe it wasn't 1,000, but maybe like 600 applicants for this job. And he stood out against people who had recruiting coordination experience over and over and over again. But because like you could see the story and then you bring him into interview and you're like, wow, like you are awesome. And we would have never known it had we not taken a chance on you. And that's to me so much more exciting than just like hiring someone who's been a recruiting coordinator before.
I mean, there's a lot of parallels to, you know, exactly how this Rojas situation came about is, and the draft is the same. So you're talking about thousands of applicants or hundreds of applicants. And that's the way that the draft pool works is at the very top, you have obviously a very specialized skill set and you're talking about the highest end commodities, but throughout the minor league level, you're trying to fill out 5 to 9 more rosters of 35 players. And so there's a lot of people vying for those jobs. And they're essentially entry-level jobs like you're talking about. So there's a lot of qualified players. There's a lot of qualified people. And it's hard. When you're at games every day for about 5 months in the spring, it's hard to sift through and really focus on, well, what differentiates this guy for an entry-level job versus the other one? Because everybody wants them. There's no question they want them. They want their foot in the door because, like I said, you climb that ladder and you get to the ultimate payout. It's worth it. It's worth the 5 to 6 year journey to get there. But like in this kid's case, drawing off of what you're saying and finding that little differentiation in a resume, well, this kid, it boiled down to how competitive he looked on a really non-competitive team in an essentially unwinnable environment. He was the only kid that had a standout makeup characteristic where the whole group looked dead in the water. He was the only one who seemed invested energetically. He had a mind for it. And so it's just one of those little things that piques your interest. And then you dig a little deeper, you invite him to a workout and he's in this non-formal setting with other draft applicants or other, you know, draft potentials. And that characteristic carried over where he looks like a man on a mission and he's determined to make a difference and look different than the rest of them. And so we ultimately get down to draft time 2 weeks later and his name popped up when, you know, 100 other ones didn't, because he had differentiated himself just based off of a couple of traits.
It's like an athlete training in like a low oxygen environment, right? So that they then, when they go perform in a different environment, they actually are faster, you know, more able to perform even better.
That's interesting. That's interesting you bring that up because, you know, the performance metrics or the performance measures of this particular player, they weren't gaudy. They didn't stand out. There were a couple of things that we look for, what's called like walk to strikeout ratio. He was a hitter. And so if you're familiar with baseball statistics, the walk versus the strikeout, so 3 strikes, you're out, 4 balls, you walk to first base. He was very good in that particular measure. But in most other measures, he was really pedestrian. Physically, he wasn't very imposing, whereas most guys that you watch play on TV, they have some sort of physically imposing characteristic. Not overtly strong. He was just kind of instinctual and skilled. And that's kind of what differentiated him is he didn't fall into the same traps that hundreds of other players fall into. But yeah, it's funny, like performance-wise, he didn't do it amongst a group of peers that tried to bring him down, but his energy level never changed. And so then when he got into our system and he was pushed by people with like talent or even more talent, his performance just skyrocketed. And that's why, like I was saying earlier, he was the first person in his class, it's an unbelievable feat for a 26th round pick to be the first person in his class to reach the highest level. Like going from one of your, you know, Heather, one of your entry level applicants to a GM in a year and a half. Like it just doesn't happen. But his performance curve was so steep that there was no stopping him. Like he couldn't keep him back. And so going back to the reward of that, and yeah, I'm glad you brought up the point of being pushed because he needed it. Like he needed it and he didn't. The push just made him realize how good he could be.
you know, I didn't start in recruiting. I didn't start in the people space, and I didn't start in tech. I spent about 8.5 years working in higher education, university systems, and like student affairs for a long time, because I really wanted to help people succeed. And I didn't know any other way because I wasn't in the workforce yet. I didn't realize that like a people operations HR function could actually be dynamic. And so I was like, well, I'm going to go help college students because I was just a college student. And so I know what that means. And I got a master's degree in it. I worked really hard, but it was very structured. It held me back. It was too slow. I just didn't feel empowered. I was like, at some point, just like phoning it in, you know, and my metrics wouldn't have looked successful either. I was just sort of like on this path and I was doing fine. But switching to tech was like this huge thing for me because I first joined a very small startup where I didn't have any support. I couldn't really learn from the best of the best. It was tiny. And I just sort of like threw myself in as like a challenge and I completely failed. And had I given up, I probably would have been back in higher education. But luckily, I applied to the company actually where I met Katarina called Hired. And I was able to learn from this wonderful man named Matt Greenberg, who basically saw something in me and my resume, despite how weird it looked, right? Like he saw my story just like I saw Sean's story, and he brought me into the company. And I was able for the first time to learn from people that would help me grow. And I was sort of like let free to do things and given opportunities I was never given before. And I grew so fast in that organization so quickly that, you know, the next job I took, even though I had never been an executive before, and it was my first tech company really, because that other one was 10 weeks long before I left. But I was able to move into executive roles right after. So suddenly I was a VP 2 times after doing this one opportunity. And it was the place where I give like my career defining credit to is like the chance when Matt gave me the chance to grow and I was set free and I was able to work with great people like Katarina and other folks. It really helped me like find myself. And I feel like I became like this better version of me each time when you don't expect that. And so I think growth can happen at any time. Like I didn't join tech till I was 30. But here I am. And, you know, 2 years later, 3 years later. So I joined tech at 30. At 33, I was a VP. And that's pretty fast, right? To go from an entry-level role alongside 22-year-olds. So I'm like, I'm going to join tech to 3 years later being a VP. It's not common, but I think it's sort of like people who take a chance on those diamonds in the rough.
But, you know, what you said earlier, Ryan, around, I can't remember exactly how you phrased it, but it was something about like seeing the potential or seeing the ceiling in somebody and saying, okay, well, where are they now? But then it's not just, can you do this role right now? It's also, where will you grow to? If we give you the resources and the support and the growth opportunities, like the sky's the limit for you, right?
Yeah. And that probably from an evaluative standpoint is the most important job that we have is, you know, you're free to develop your own method of projection, your own projection models. They still have to fit within the construct of a certain grading system that we use, which is an arbitrary 20 to 80 scale. You could call it 1 through 10, but we use 20 through 80. And we do present grades relative to a major league population, and then we do future grades relative to a major league population. So hypothetically, you're going and watching a 17-year-old kid, and you're trying to look at him now and figure out what can he be in 5-6 years when he's on a field full of grown men. What's he going to look like as a grown man? What's that initial tool set that we evaluate and assess? What's that going to look like when he's a grown man? Because I was actually doing some of these before we got on this call. I'm up in Ventura scouting some games, and so seeing kids and being like, well, his fastball is 88 miles an hour. Major league average is up around 94 miles an hour, but there's underlying physical traits that the frame that he carries, the way that his arm moves, the way that his body moves. There are ways for this kid to ascend physically to eventually reach, and you know that's where the projection comes in, to eventually reach a certain velocity ceiling of closer to major league average. And so that's where our context, the time you spend around the game of baseball and the time you spend around different people, it helps you build that perspective and sort of give you confidence in your projection model. And that's where we become important, because you're sitting around in a room full of other scouts talking about a kid that, well, you're describing something presently that's not that attractive, but then you're saying that he could end up being the best player on our major league team. Like, tell us how he's going to get there. And so you get to fill in all those blanks. And that's where, like I said, you build this profile early, and then the process starts. Like, I'm actually really interested in this kid, so I'm going to go talk to him. I'm going to talk to his coaches. I want to meet his parents. I want to develop an understanding of his background. Is he intelligent? Is he studied? Like, is he not going to overthink things? Like, those sorts of things really matter. I was the opposite. I was an overthinker, and I was a good player, but I had no ceiling because I was getting in my own way. And you have to know those things about kids once you decide there's a certain level of interest. And then you dig deep onto who they are and whether or not it's realistic that they reach that ceiling.
Heather, do you evaluate for potential? I mean, I guess what you're saying is that you do, in the sense, especially for those kind of diamonds in the rough, you're looking for, like, what could they do? But I'm we don't, in the business world, you don't have like they're 16, what can they be when they're 30 sort of evaluation.
It's so much more short term. Yeah.
But I assume, in a sense, you're looking for employees that desire ascension, or they have a little bit of a determination to get to another level or to develop personally and professionally. I mean, in a sense, I would guess that's the similarity.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. It's like, we don't meet their parents, right? Like, we don't involve in their lives. Like, it's very much about them and the skill set. It's so much, we want people to bring their whole selves into work, and we do encourage that once they've joined. But it's sort of like, that's not the evaluation, because that leads to so many, at least for us, like, so many biases that are outside of the world. I mean, I guess there is like psychology, in performance in both the workplace and in athletics, but we just haven't been trained to really think about it in that way. But what I sort of look at is, there's sort of like, everybody sort of has like a bell curve in their career where they sort of don't have the experience, and they start to gain it. And then once they have it, if they don't continue to challenge themselves, they might kind of fall back flat again. And so just because somebody's done the job 6 times doesn't mean they're actually the best person to do the job, because they could be actually on their way out. So that passion and that desire and that drive, that psychology is so important. And you can sort of get that in an interview. Like, there's really simple things, like even just how they treat people throughout the process. Like, there are some things that you don't necessarily measure in a formal sense in a scorecard, but they're on your mind. Like, I'll ask always the same question typically when I kick off the very first interview with a candidate, because I want them to have a chance to tell their story. And so I always start every interview with, why Webflow, why now, right? And previous companies, why that company, why now? And I want to know, like, why do they want this? Like, why is this the right opportunity for them? And if I see sort of like some flags in their resume that make me think maybe there is something that they don't want about this opportunity, or maybe it's like a backup choice or something, I'll try and test for that at times. Where, I mean, I don't typically put like passion as a competency on the scorecard. They're usually soft skills and hard skills. Like, do they know how to do X thing? And do they have these like basic attributes that would make them good at the job? For example, like great writing skills or something. And there's always this missing piece, right? Which I think is, we don't always, and some companies might do this, but I don't ever really put this as a factor in the decision. But what I want to know is, like, do they have passion, and do they have drive, and are they going to approach this job like it's an exciting opportunity that they can really like show, their own growth for it? If they don't see the growth for themselves, a lot of times it doesn't work out in my experience. Like, when people feel like this is a job that's like a step back, or this is a job that isn't actually what they were going for, sometimes you make mistakes in the hiring process when you sort of just go on the skills, because what ends up happening is that person wasn't really happy there. And it's important that they're making the choice as much as you're making the choice. Like, it's a mutual fit. And so I do think, I wish we would infuse more in some ways. If we could find a way to do it without adding too many biases, I wish we could infuse more of like the whole person and the personal, to really understand the whole story of this person. Because unfortunately, there's way too much bias from an evaluation side to really do that in an effective way. But I do think there is some benefit to it if it can be figured out.
Mm.
Yeah, and that goes back almost full circle to the first part that I was talking about, in terms of, avoiding getting your ego involved and liking a guy just for the sake of liking a guy. Because you go out and you evaluate them objectively to get their hard skills, like you're talking about, and get that skeleton of a profile going. And if that looks really, really exciting when you're projecting the ceiling on that skeleton profile, you want to avoid just going in for confirmation bias. Like, everything the kid says is gold. I'm not even really listening, because I just want the player so bad that I'm not picking up on the red herrings that he's giving me, that are all indicating that he's not going to get there, or vice versa, that because I've been guilty of the opposite, where I really don't like the player that much. It's just like an entry level profile for me at best, which you need them, but there's not a whole lot to really sink your teeth into when you're talking about ascending and becoming a really valuable asset. But then you have to give that kid, if the organization identifies him as a potential asset, you have to give that kid the same amount of attention as the one who you really, really want, because the indicators might suggest that you're missing something. And so just eliminating ego. So I guess that's where in our roles, we have to be so self-aware that we're not just doing things to pacify ourselves, and that we're not just looking for the same thing over and over and over again, that we're constantly looking for signals in a bunch of different static,
Yeah. Everything you just said is so true. And I wouldn't have to change a single word of it, and it would apply to my job like verbatim. So that's fascinating.
Yeah.
So there you have it from the experts. A few key takeaways. People often conflate background or pedigree with a person's potential. To combat that, get really specific about the skills that you're looking for and what your team needs, and then use that in your hiring outreach as well as your scoring rubric for interviews. That can help you reduce human bias, not to mention find the right person for the job. Don't be too eager to fill a seat just because you're shorthanded. It's tempting, but it's worse to hire someone who doesn't fit the role or the organization than not to hire someone at all. Don't fall prey to the idea that just because someone has done a job before, that they are the best person to do it again. Instead, try to find the person that's most excited and inspired by the job, as they'll be the most motivated. And finally, try to evaluate people on their growth potential, not just their current ability. A huge thank you to Heather and to Ryan for sharing their wise insights with others. If you like this episode, please leave us a review. We're hoping to bring these conversations to as many people as possible, and every review helps us do that. Thanks for listening. I'm Katarina Jones, and this has been Otherwise Insights.